Good evening. Um, so I think we should move on from the Shittul Iran, um, which we spent quite a lot of time unpicking last time, and we began looking at the Rosh, and I just really wanted to start off today by learning the Rosh, and then the Rambam, which is in the source sheets, and then on to the other Rishonim. Um, so the Rosh starts off, and this is a beautiful. It's a privilege to learn this Rosh because he really takes us through his thinking process. He tells us what he originally thought, and then why he changed his mind because he saw another source, and then he understood the other source. It's nice to sort of learn a Rosh where you see his Havamina and his Maskana. And the Rosh makes a number of points. The first thing he says is let's start with the second line of the Rosh. The first line, the first 1.5 lines, he quotes the Gemara. V'hainu tama, he says, Ki pa'amim kosav mishkan tois al karash echad, o mochek k'tei lichter v'cheres b'mkoma, and therefore min adin ha'yoroi l'chayev af mochek ois achas, k'tei lichter v'cheres b'mkoma, she'en roi l'chayev al mashevet tzivi yesma al k'siv atzma. So he says a number of points here. The first thing is that it's obvious that in the Mishkan, I mean, it's not just the Rosh who says this, there's another Rishonim, but it's obvious that in the Mishkan they made mistakes. I don't entirely understand that, but when the Gemara is understanding the Lamed Tes Melachos and looking at everything that took place in the Mishkan, it's just maybe it's a bit of a, maybe this is a Musa point more than a Lomdasha or halachic point. But it seems that it's obvious to the Gemara that if you try and achieve anything, you're inevitably going to make mistakes. So, I mean, we would say how many Koloshim are there in the Mishkan and how many letters needed to be written. And it's a pretty important job, and these are craftsmen doing it, right? They're writing the letters and the Koloshim in order to get them in order. So presumably they did it okay and didn't make any mistakes. Like, does the Gemara know historically they made mistakes? Like we have a Masorah that the Chazal somehow knew they must have made mistakes, and therefore there must be a melachot on Mochek. Maybe they did all the Koloshim without making mistakes. It seems whether factually, historically, they made mistakes or not. If you're thinking about constructing a Mishkan, one of the constructive actions in building a Mishkan is making a mistake and fixing it. It's sort of integral to the manufacturing process that mistakes happen and repairs need to be done. This is not the only melacha where this applies. And the Gemara speaks about kosher that the melacha of knotting is when nofal baldana, and there's machlokes is what nofal baldana is, but when threads detach and you need to reattach them, then also you would need to do the melacha of kosher of knotting. But just as a sort of ha'ara, it seems if we're looking at the Mishkan, we're looking at the constructive activities that are to take place in the Mishkan, the 39 constructive activities that are to take place in producing a Mishkan. You can't ignore that one of the constructive activities is, and perhaps more, is fixing up mistakes that happen. Even if normally it wouldn't happen, but integral to doing anything, achieving anything. I think of the pasuk, "Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yachta." There's no tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yachta. Maybe there's a tzaddik ba'aretz or maybe there's people ba'aretz who don't do good, and they can also get away with not sinning. But if ya'aseh tov, if you're doing good, then if you do anything, you're also going to commit mistakes. There's a Gemara that's talking about on Wednesdays. I'm giving a shiur on Ezra at the moment. There's an amazing Gemara. The Gemara talks about different Gedolim who made mistakes. And the Gemara says that Ezra also made a mistake. How do we know he made a mistake? Because Ezra says, it quotes the passage in Ezra, Ezra says, Binoisi, I understood something. And the Gemara says, Binoisi mechlal v'tar. It's impossible he understood something without having made a mistake. It's an amazing mind-blowing Gemara. There's many words in Torah for wisdom. Maybe you can be a chacham without making a mistake. But bina, which is maven davar mitoch davar, where you build something yourself, you extrapolate something from something else. Michal datar, there has to be a Taurus built into this. Just amazing line in the Gemara. Always rings in my ear after I learned the Gemara, so the rest of my life it rings in my ear. Benoisi michal datar. If you understand something, you must have gone through making a mistake. So either way, Musa finished. I just want to say that I find this very interesting. That the point that Rosh makes, others showing to make that that inevitably. One of the constructive activities in the Mishkan is mechiko, is correcting a mistake. The second point the Rosh makes is that you could have thought that meleches mochek should only be with one ois, not because you can fit two oises in, but just fundamentally it's only with one ois. Why? Because he seems to say kasiva only makes sense if it's two oises. Rabbi Zobin is where you will learn the melacha of kosev. And one of the big discussions in Kosev is why do you need two oisius? What's this idea of two oisius? Is it a svara that it's only chashuv if it has two oisius? Does it come from the Mishkan? Because in the Mishkan they always had two oisius because the whole malach of the Mishkan was writing an ois on one karish and an ois on another karish, so you could know how to attach them, and that only makes sense if there's two oisius. Is it a shear? in which case there'd be Chatzi Shiur, or is it some other Lomdus? Either way, the Rosh here seems to say that the reason why Kosef needs to be two oisius is because in the Mishkan it only makes sense if it's two oisius. You have to write an ois on one karesh, on one beam, and an ois on the other karesh, and then you've got the couplet. You're able to piece them together in order to know which beams go next to which other. In which case, Mochek shouldn't logically have to be two oisius. Mochek could even be one ois, because if you make one letter of mistake, you need to be Mochek it. So it says the Rosh, I could have had a havamina that Mechika should be more chomo than that Mechika should be one ois, even though Ksiv is two oisius. No, it's a svara that the melacha of Mochek can't be more chashuv than the melacha of Kosev. Now it's true that the halacha Mochek is if you're Mochek one ois and Kosev is only if you're Mochek two oisius, but that's because Mechika is preparing the groundwork for two oisius. But fundamentally, even Mechika has a share of two oisius, like Ksiva has a share of two oisius. Why? The chashivas of Mechika is even if you're Mochek one letter. No, says the Rosh, it's not reasonable that Mochek should be more chomo than Kosev. In other words, the significance of the act of Mochek, if Kosev's only deemed a malacha if you produce two pieces of information, it's mistaba that Mochek's only a malacha if you erase two pieces of information, or at least you erase space to write two pieces of information. And therefore Mechika also has a share of shtei oisius. Yeah, Adam, sorry.
I think maybe the key word is Masechet Ketiva, because he's saying that the essential malacha of Mochek is Masechet Ketiva. It's not. It's less than Ketiva. You're thinking about writing. So thinking about writing, by definition, has to be can't be more chomo than writing itself.
Yeah. So this is a very fine point, and I'm going to come to this in a moment. For now, I'm sort of being creatively ambiguous because you're right what you're saying. This is what the Rosh says. But all I want to say is, for now, in a minute we'll have to deepen what we're saying and go to your point. All I'm saying for now, though, is that the Rosh had a havamina or a svara that you could have thought that Mochek should be one ois, even though Kosev is two oises. That's because logically, go and look what happens in the Mishkan. Kosev is only makes sense if it's two oises that you can link two karashim. Mochek, which is fixing, even makes sense if you're doing one. So the Rosh, no, it can't be that Mochek is less than Kosev, as Adam says, because Mochek is Machshavas Kesiva and Kosev is Kesiva itself. But we'll come back to that in a moment. The Rosh then says that he thought that Mochek has to be Mechika of Oisius, but not Mechikas Tishtush, because in the Mishkan it was a Mechikas of an Ois. And then he says, no, I saw in the Tosefta I'm wrong, and that even Mechikas Tishtush is the Melachas Mochek. And he says, I guess you can explain it, because I thought that only Mechika of an Ois is the Melacha. But Mechika of Tishtush isn't the Melacha, because like the Mishkan, it was Mechika of an Ois is something Choshev. If you're Mechik an Ois, that's the Melacha. If you're Mochek Tishtush, that's nothing Choshev. But he says, I guess that doesn't make sense, because the whole reason you're being Mochek to Ois is because it's a mistake. If it's a mistake, it's a Tishtush. If I wrote an Aleph and I Mochek it because I didn't mean to write an Aleph, then it's not really an Aleph, it's just a mistake. If it's just a mistake, it has no Chashivas, in which case there's no more Choshev than Tishtush, and therefore if I Mochek a Tishtush, I'm also, that's sufficient to be Chayv, and that's the Tosefta. Now, originally, when I first read the Rosh, I thought that the chakura of the Rosh is the following. Already when we learned the Mishnah, I mentioned, and this is really going to be the focus of the rest of today's share and next share, what is the melacha of Mochek? Is the melacha of Mochek deleting information? Kosev is creating information, and the melacha of Mochek is deleting information. That's option number 2, really. I should have said it in the wrong order. Or is the melacha of Mochek preparing a surface for writing, and it's a preparatory step to Kosev? Okay, so let's step back for a minute. The Mishnah says you're only chayiv for Kosev l'manas limchek. Is the Mishnah saying sorry, Mochek l'manas lichtov? Is the Mishnah saying that that's the essence of the melacha? The name of the melacha is Mochek l'manas lichtov. In other words, the name of the melacha is mechika, which is cleansing paper in preparation for writing. It's part of the Sidura of the Kosev. It's part of the order of writing. Like I mentioned, there's a Sidura of Pas. There's 11 melachos to get to bread. There's a series of melachos to get to writing. There's skinning an animal, killing an animal, trapping an animal, killing an animal, skinning the animal, tanning the leather, and writing on the leather. There's a whole array of melachos you need to do in order to be able to write. And one of the preparatory melachos for writing is, if there's a mistake there, is Mochek. So Mochek really means cleansing paper in order to be able to write on it. That's the name of the melacha, is Mochek and Manas Lichtov. Or option 1 and 2 is, no, Mochek is a standalone melacha. Mochek means erasing information. Creating information is an achievement, and erasing information is an achievement. Except that, for whatever reason, you're only chayiv if it's almanas lichtov, perhaps so that it's not mekalkel, because just erasing information is making the world less complex, is removing information. That's called mekalkel, that's destructive. It has to be productive. So an example of when erasing information is productive is when it's almanas lichtov. But that's just a way, for example, of avoiding mekalkel. Now, we will spend a lot of time looking at these two possible definitions, but originally, I thought that's what the conversation in the Rosh is revolving around. If Mochek means erasing information, then it's only mechika of an ice. If you're Mochek tishtush, that's not mechika, because you'll know information that you're erasing. It's true that has to be almanas lichtov, but that's just in order that it should be a productive malacha. But the essence of the malacha is erasing information. That's what the Rosh is saying. Learn from the Mishkan, that Mishkan is erasing information, not erasing tishtush. Kamash Malon says the Rosh, no. The malacha is preparatory sidura to ksiva. It's preparing a space for ksiva, and therefore even mechika of tishtush is enough. That's what you see from the Tosefta. That was my first glance reading of the Rosh. Sorry, Max, you've been waiting.
Can't be the first reading because you don't always make mistakes. So the whole of the preparation of the writing normally without making a mistake and without running anything out. Just sometimes
right.
Make a mistake, in which case something else.
But in a case where there's a mistake, you have to do mechika, and therefore it's an optional part of the sidura to ksiva. You can write without skinning deer and without shachting deer and without catching them. It's just that's part of the sidura. So cleansing paper for writing is one of them, is at least an optional path, and therefore one of the melachos. So that's initially how I read the Rosh. I think this is a profoundly poor reading of the Rosh, and I think this is a classic example of trying to squeeze something into Rishon. That's not what the Rishon is saying, because it sort of fits nicely in my mind, but actually it's incorrect. I think that when you look with care at the Rosh, even in the Havamina, he understood it's preparation for writing. First of all, because as Adam pointed out, the line before, he says it can't be that Machshavas Kesiva can be more than Kesiva. He says it can't be that Kosev is Chayiv only for two, and Mochek is Chayiv for one, because Mochek he defines as Machshavas Kesiva. Now, if Mochek is erasing its own information, and that's the chashivas of the malach, and you have to have almanas lichtov just in order to avoid it being mekalkel. That doesn't make sense. He then could have said something else. He could have said, like I originally summarized the Rosh, which is it's not reasonable that erasing information should be more chamor than creating information. That's not what he says. He says it's not reasonable that machsheves kesiva should be more chamor than actual kesiva. So it sounds like already in the Havamina, he defines Mochek. What's the melachot Mochek? Mochek is preparation for kosev. That's the first point. The second point is, he doesn't say, I learnt from the Tosefta that it's a different melacha. He says, I learnt from the Tosefta that a wrong letter is no more choshev than tishtush. In my version, the chiddush of the Tosefta was, the Havamina was, mechika is erasing information, Tosefta is mechadesh, even erasing tishtush is enough. Why? Because it's preparatory for kosev. That's not what the Rosh says. He doesn't say that what's really going on is this big clunky switch in what the whole definition of the melacha is. He says, no, I'm not changing my definition of melacha. It's just beforehand I thought there's an additional chashivas to erasing a letter. Kamash Manon, no, since it's a mistaken letter, it's no more choshev than tishtush. So it sounds like the Rosh isn't changing his definition of melacha. All along he understood that the melacha is preparation for clearing a space. Nonetheless, he thought that's only when I raise a letter, Kamash Malon, it's even when I raise tishtush, that's enough. That seems the reading in the Rosh. In which case I'm really left struggling. I don't understand the Rosh. Because if the melacha is preparation of space, then indeed, what is the difference between an ice and a tishtush? What was this Havamina? So I'm arguing that the Rosh all the way through understood the essence of the malach is preparing space, and yet somehow he had a havamina, perhaps a bit more like the territory of the Ran, that preparing space when you're erasing writing is called preparing space for more writing, but removal of tishtush is not called preparing space for more writing. and therefore I thought that it's not the melacha. Kamashmanon it is. But the Rosh is it seems clear he understood that the melacha is preparation for writing, not erasing information, and that was never what changed. So I'm left a little bit I'm left a little bit unclear in what the what the Havamina and Maskana of the Rosh is, but I don't believe that my thought that he's Gufa playing with this Rakira as to what the essence of Malacha is what's going on in the Rosh. There's no hint that that's really the Havamina and Maskana. Yes, Rafi.
I thought it was a bit more simple to Havamina because Mochek it's also different things, destructive melachot like Mochek Sota. So Mochek is referring to referring to the destruction of land. That's what you would think by default, because not like we have with other things are referring to destroying other things like different
like Sosal, Nas Livnos or
Sota.
Sota, yeah. Okay.
So what makes this different to other things? Because this is referring to letters. So once we since we know it wasn't a Mishkan, it was with letters. So and it's definitely referring to at least letters. So we would presume that's the extent of the melachot. There's no reason to think it should be referring to more than that.
If you're saying a fine point, but I'm not sure it's cutting to the core of my problem in the Rosh. You are correctly mentioning that there can be examples of mochik, which are other ways of having a constructive mechika, and we'll look at that. Indeed, we will definitely get back to this. But again, I want to push you into the corner. There's two models of what mochik is. Either mochik is that the destroying the information in and of in itself is the malacha, and then you have to find what reasons why that's not called mekalkel. Maybe Sota is an example of that. Maybe Almanas Lichtov is an example. But these are just ways to make it a positive achievement in its own right. But the core malacha is mechik of information. In which case, you're right. The Havamina of the Rosh would make a great deal of sense. That's why he thought it's only removing a letter. I agree. That's what I thought the Rosh was saying in his Havamina. That he came in thinking the malach is the removal of information, hence you need a letter, and the Tosefta saw it not like that. But I don't believe that's a correct reading of the Rosh. It's a nice idea, but it's not what the Rosh says. Even in the Havamina, it seems to me, the Rosh knew that the malach was preparatory to Kosiv, because 2 lines before, as your father pointed out, he defines Mochek as Machsheves Kasiva. And he doesn't indicate that the Tosefta taught me, wow, I got the whole malacha wrong, and that the malacha isn't deletion of information, the malacha is preparation read. He says, I just learned that a tishtush is also enough. So I don't think that's the idea the Rosh is playing with. I don't think that's a good reading. Yes.
So the Mishnah defines it as a preparation for.
Does the Mishnah define it as preparation for Kosev, or is the Mishnah just giving an example of a positive activity? That's how Shiloh. I presume all you want, but we don't know enough to know whether that presumption is correct. And in the Rosh, I don't know if it's correct. But by the way, I want to point out that the Rishonim struggle with this, right? So Tosfos, for example, and Rabbi Kivega picks on that, is Korea Almanas Litzvar. Is that, and we've got that in the Mishnah, Korea Almanas Litzvar. So again, you would presume that means the essence of the malacha of Korea tearing is preparation for tefillah, and Tosfos on Ein Gimel on base indeed seems to assume that. And Rabbi Kivega says, I don't understand what you're talking about, because we know there's other examples of Korea b'chamosoi, where you're using it to calm yourself down, where that's deemed positive, not mekalkel, and that's also enough. So this is a running confusion in many malachas. So I hear that the Mishnah is interesting. The Mishnah says it. But we are left unclear about this. And in the Rosh, I think the Rosh is adopting one stance in this debate, which is that it's indeed preparatory to Kosev. And yet, nonetheless, he had a Havamina that's only when you're deleting a letter, not when you're just deleting Tishtush. Why? Because somehow when you're deleting a letter, it's more Omeid for Kosiva than otherwise. I don't really know what to make of that, other than the Ran also said a similar thing.
he's able. I think he's very clear that he does think what you think he says, where he says "Ki lo haya b'mishkan ela machika othiot
Yeah.
kedei lichtov bimkomo."
Yeah.
So he's very clear it's kedei lichtov
Yeah.
bimkomo.
Yeah.
But for some reason, he also thinks
Yeah.
it can, and whether that's just, I mean, you've talked before about the top down or bottom up, whether
Yeah.
he's particularly focused on it having to be top down, and
You-
therefore,
yeah, but you can't.
It seems weird.
I agree with your deacon in the Rosh, but again, there has to be some svara why it's significant in the Mishkan they were only Mochek Osius. If the malach is preparation of writing space, the Rosh is correct to point out that in the Mishkan happened to be the only thing they did was delete letters. But what's the again in the Mishkan happened to be they were standing in the desert. In the Mishkan happened to be that maybe they were all wearing white clothes. I don't know. There's 1,000 distinctions you can say. None of them are significant. So, but I agree.
Is it just something to do with the Shiur of Otio? Maybe that actually just.
But if the whole point is preparing paper, then why I don't know, why should it be more chashuv? I agree with you. But I think a glut reading of the Rosh is that the Rosh is not shifting his whole understanding of the malach over here. It's too casual, the back and forth. He doesn't say, I'm rearranging reconfiguring my whole understanding of the malacha. I think even if everything else I say is wrong, I think this is an important point, which is this is a good, careful reading of the Rosh, and the fact that and therefore we're left confused. Okay, we're left confused, but that's what the Rosh says. Yeah.
Silly grammar, but the chita, what does that word mean? As in Korea, soter means destroy.
Yeah.
The chita, is that not related to text, or is that not?
I don't know. It's a very, very good question. I'm not even sure how to translate the word. Does mechika mean erasing text? Is it related? I'm just repeating this so it gets on the recording for those who are listening in Zoom because it's such a fine line. I don't know. Is mechika? Does mechika mean clearing space or erasing text? What's the translation of the word? I'm not entirely sure. I know modern Hebrew and so on, but in Mishnaic, what's the melachot of mechika? No, in a way that's what we're asking. What's the very definition? Just to again sort of join the dots, as it were, or connect things, I want to remind you that this Tosefta is ignored by the Ran and is problematic for the Ran because let's build this one by one. First of all, what the Rosh says, even from the Tosefta, that even mechik of tishtush is enough. How big a patch of tishtush? Well, it has to be a mokum for Yeshiva-style. How big is mokum Yeshiva-style? Benonius? Why Benonius? Where do we get that from? I don't know what the answer is. The Ran answered the question because the Ran was Medayik, Eis Godel, and so on. In the Rosh, does the Rosh agree with that? Do you cannot? The Rosh says the Ran says it has to be in the same font. Tishtush doesn't have a font by definition. Why did the Ran not bring this Tosefta? Did he not have the Tosefta? I mean, the Rosh didn't have the Toseftas. You see, it wasn't all the Rishonim had these brises. The Rosh wasn't initially at some earlier stage in his life. He wasn't aware of this Tosefta. On the other hand, the Rosh is a contemporary of the Rashba. The Ran, or even the Meyuchas Ran, we think was the same generation as the Ran is the generation after the Rashba, the generation of the Ritva. So did the Ran not have the Tosefta? Or did he have the Tosefta and think the Tosefta disagrees with the Bavli? Maybe he ignores the Tosefta because he thinks the Bavli says Mochek Ois Achas, and the Tosefta says Mochek Tishtush. If the Bavli would have agreed with the Tosefta, it wouldn't have said Mochek Ois Achas, it's Mochek Tishtush, that's a bigger Kiddush. So did the Ran think that it's ridiculous to bring the Tosefta? The Tosefta is against the Bavli. Is that what the Ran thought? I don't know. I don't know where to go with this. So just in terms of finishing things up, in the Rosh we're left with, I suppose, the questions that the Ran came to solve. What size are we talking about? Beinonis or not? I don't know. And in the Ran we're left with, what does the Ran do with the Tosefta? Unless the Ran Gufa learned that the Tosefta disagrees with the Bavli, and maybe the disagreement is over this point itself, that if the significance of the malacha is removing information, maybe the Ran thought that the whole Tosefta is irrelevant. Maybe, I don't know. So, I don't know. It's difficult to know where to go with all of this. Let's move on from that happy space to the Rambam. So just to summarize where we are, I think it seems to me the Rosh is clearly in the camp of the malacha being clearing space for writing. That's what the Tosefta says, and I'm not entirely sure what his Havamina there. Not entirely sure. I should be honest. I'm not in the least clear why he had a Havamina that this was only mechichas ois. I'm not entirely clear. Besides all the other problems we had in the Ran last week, I don't know what the Ran would do. The Tosefta, does he not have the Tosefta? Does he think the Tosefta was Shalok Halacha against the Bavli? I don't know. All interesting questions. We will see more Makomis about this issue. So even though we're leaving a lot hanging, we will see various rights about this. But let's have a look at let's learn Rabbi the Rambam together. I gave it out in the source sheets. And I suppose with that we'll finish for today. What's the Rambam's position on all of this? So let's try and look at the Rambam. This is the Rambam in Perek Yud of Halacha Tes. HaKoisei shtei osis chayev. HaMochek Tzav Manas Lichtov B'Makom HaMechak shtei osis chayev. Okay, that's basically the Gemara. HaKoisei osachas gedola k'shtayim pata. That's also really the Gemara. The fact that you write a big letter doesn't make a difference, still one letter. Mochek ois achas gedola v'yesh b'mkomo gedol lichtov shtayim chayev. If you're mochek a big ois and there's been komer gedol lichtov shtayim chayev, that's also really the Gemara. I mean, that's the Brisa, that's the Gemara. Does the Rambam give any clue as to whether he holds like the Shitta Ran or not? I don't think there's any indication. He doesn't say. He said it's the Gemara, but he doesn't spell out like the Ran. Yesh b'mkomo gedol lichtov shtei oisis beinonius. Or Yeshiva Komer Lichtov Shtei Oisius, the same Oisius. He doesn't say any of that. He doesn't spell out that there's any conditions over here like the Ran does. So we don't really see that he says like the Ran. Sorry, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we don't need to have the intention to write when he's saying.
Yeah, we'll have to get onto that. But it sounds like he doesn't say Al Manas Lichtov. He says just the Yeshiva Komer. Yeah, doesn't say Al Manas. Yeah, we'll come to that shortly.
Is that not contradicting? His first statement?
I think it is contradicting his first statement. Yes, it's a problem. So I guess I was going to get to this later because I wanted to see the third section. I remember, but you're making my point. The Rambam begins by saying "Hamochek sav al manas lichtov b'makom mechek shtei osis chayev." You need al manas, and at the end he says "Mochek oisachas gedola v'yesh b'mkomo gedol lichtov shtayim chayev." He doesn't say anything about al manas. Don't know. Interesting. Okay, if you just had these two sources, maybe he's saying both. You need almanas and mokum. So he's already mentioned the condition of almanas. Of course, you need almanas. All he's now saying is that the b'mkoma, it's enough that you have b'mkoma, even though it's going to be smaller osis by definition, that's still enough. So before he's talking about your intention, and now he's talking about the sort of mechanical facts of space. Yeah, but we'll see. It gets a little bit less clear. Then he has Kosovo Zachas Vision by Sefer Chayiv. Let's not go into that. That's a concept around Kosovo. Then he says HaKosovo Nas LeKalkal Ha'or Chayiv Shein Chiyuv Al Makom Ksav El Ksav. Okay, let's again do that. We're not on Menachas Kosovo. Aval HaMochek Am Nas LeKalkal Potter. If you're Mochek Am Nas LeKalkal Potter. So this seems to say that. Mochek al manas lekalkel is potter. Implication that mochek that's not al manas lekalkel is chayev. Implication that you don't really need mochek al manas lichtov. As long as it's a mochek that's not a kilkul, that's enough. So in answer to our question, is the name of the melacha mochek al manas lichtov, or is the name of the melacha mochek and any positive benefit, non-kilkul mochek would be enough to chayev? And al manas lichtov is just an example of that. He seems to adopt the latter position, that it's just an example of it. So if you had another mechika which wasn't a kilkel, like Rafi's example of a mechika of Seita or anything else, we mentioned the mechika of an IOU. If I have a star that I owe you money and I want to raise it because I have paid you back, whatever it is, the Rambam seems to say that's enough. As long as it's not a mechik, a manasa kalkel, that's enough. Does everyone agree with that to you? So the Rambam says. In which case, we have another steer in the Rambam. Because the first line of the Rambam said that kosav manasa lichtov b'makom mechak shteyos is chayev. And now the Rambam's saying that you don't need a manas lichtov as long as it's as long as it's not a manas kalkel, that's enough. So we have a I think we have a steer in the Rambam. Sorry.
Maybe the first line is just to give him a shear.
But he says al manas. He doesn't just say shear. He says you have to mochek manas lichtov. You don't need to mochek manas lichtov. If you have another mochek which is not a kilkel, that'd also be enough. So it's mamish a steer in Rambam. Sorry.
No, I think your answer. I thought, can we apply the same answer that you suggested? With the potential contradiction in the beginning, in here as well. So, I don't raise in order, but then it seems to be redundant, really, to mention it again.
Yeah, it's a funnily structured Rambam. And I guess we'll stop here because we run out of time. In next week, we'll look at Nothra, where the Rambam Paskins, it's after the Rosh, we'll see what he holds. Just to summarize, it seems to me the Rambam doesn't hold like the Run. I think that's the glassest reading the Rambam. He doesn't mention any conditions about the Run, and we're left with a stira that for now we'll leave unresolved, that the Rambam at the beginning seems to say the essence of the Melach is Al-Manas Limchaik, and at the end he seems to say the essence of the Melach is any Mechika, as long as it's not Makalkal. That's where we'll stop for today. Okay, I wish everyone a Good evening. Thank you so much for joining.